So to kick things off with our remote learning here, I just want to review where we left off way back in the day on March 12th. Um, we reviewed those quizzes. We went over some of the basic keyboard skills, which are going to be a little bit tricky since I don't know if both of you have keyboards, but we're going to be able to work around that. And then I just want to review some of our seventh chords to give you a nice, quick, and simple assignment for the week. So let's get started. Our mini keyboards. It's a shame that we don't have those. However, this graphic right here, I'm going to be putting in a Google Drive folder so that all of you can access it. If you have a printer at home, it would be a really good idea to print out this little keyboard. I'll try to size it in a way where it'll almost match the size of the mini keyboards that we had. This will at least give you something to practice the scales on. You won't get any feedback in terms of sound, but you'll still be able to get a feel for how it's going to feel on an actual keyboard. Just remember our boats. If you fall off the small boat, you're in the C, because when you fall off this small boat right here, you end on the note C. If you just remember that one big trick, you'll be able to figure out the rest of it because you're very smart people. We've talked about this and you've got a good handle on it. So moving right along now, our intervals, just mess around with some intervals. I'll also have this, I'll have this whole PowerPoint actually on notated with my drawings up on the Google Drive. So you'll be able to see all of these slides as well as hear them along with my voice. But just mess around with those keyboards, play some intervals, and check out your triads. Now, just as a quick review of triads here, what makes a major triad major versus a minor triad minor is all about the third. The note that you're always going to be playing using your middle finger. If the third fits in the key of the root, meaning in the key of C, if this third is E, which in this case it is, then that is going to be your major triad. Whereas if it is not in the key of C, in this case an E flat, that's not quite right, then it's going to be minor. Keep that in mind because that is a very important thing to know as we move into our seventh chords. And again, here's me explaining that the distance between the root and the third, that wasn't the greatest color, I'll erase that. The distance between the root and the third in a major triad is a major third. The distance between the root and the third in a minor triad is a minor third. And then it flip-flops when you go back and forth in between the third and the fifth. So your diminished triad, this was one of those ones that we talked about a little bit, but we didn't talk about a whole lot until the last class. Basically what this is are these two or three very important points. The distance between the root here and the fifth should be a tritone or a diminished fifth, a lowered fifth. Then the distance between root and third and fifth are both minor thirds. So that whole idea of a minor third in this case is really, really huge. If you just remember always a minor third, then you will always find your diminished triad. So keep this in mind. Now we're going into our comparisons. If you remember this one, I asked you to compare this to this. And of course, that comparison is that it's a major triad sandwiched between a major seventh chord. If you remember this lesson, all of these triads or all of these seventh chords are some kind of a seventh with a triad in between them. So in this case, yes, we have our major triad right here. And then we have a seventh, a major seventh, right over here between the root and the seventh. So because of that, it is a major seventh. Now, if you look at these two pictures here, check it out. It's the same exact triad, but this time around, we've got a lower seventh. We have a major minor seventh chord or a dominant chord. I prefer dominant. I will almost always refer to these as dominant chords. So just be aware that that is how I am going to identify them. But also be aware that major minor seventh is a reasonable way to talk about these chords. And it's the way that your theory book is going to do it as well. So the major minor seventh chord. A major triad, what we've got right here, sandwiched in between a minor seventh, what we've got going from here, the root, up to the seventh. It's right there. And it's also going to be called dominant, often abbreviated as just whatever your root note is. In this case, it's C, and then a 7 directly next to it. Oh, look out now. We got something that changed up. Check it out. There's a flat now on our third. And if we were to go all the way back, you know that this now means that we're looking at a minor triad here instead. And if you copied or think back to the previous slide, when we had the lowered flat next to the seventh here, that's a minor seventh. So this triad, or this seventh chord, my apologies, would be your minor seventh chord, right? And that's all just because you have a minor triad sandwiched in between a minor seventh from the root to the seventh. This is one of the prettiest sounding chords in my opinion. I really love how this one sounds. Really great just to play them back and forth, just only using minor seventh chords. And a lot of jazz tunes that I'm a big fan of actually only use minor seventh chords. For example, if you're familiar with the musician Miles Davis, on his album Kind of Blue, one of the best-selling jazz albums of all time, the opening track, So What, only uses 2 minor seventh chords. It uses the D minor 7 chord and the E flat minor 7 chord. And that's it. Aside from those 2 chords, there's nothing else being played, and this turned into one of the best-selling jazz tracks, jazz albums of all time. So you can really create some amazing things if you're thinking creatively and using just the minimal tools, which in this case we're going to be talking is the minor 7th chord. Moving right along now, yikes! Think back again. We have 2 flats right here, we have 2 lowered notes. If we're thinking based on the root note, from here to here is a minor third. So this is definitely not a major triad. And then from the third to the fifth, it's another minor third. And if we're going to be thinking from the root to the fifth, you've got a tritone. You've got a dim 7, or sorry, a diminished fifth. I apologize for my poor penmanship using this this clicking software here. It doesn't really, not the easiest thing to do, but so yeah, this is actually a diminished triad now. And if we look down here, there's your diminished triad again. Here's it is up here. Here it is down here. And once more, we've got this B flat above a C natural. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, some type of seventh. In the key of C, B is not supposed to be flat, it's supposed to be natural. In this case, it's flat. So we have to call that a minor seventh. And we end up with the half diminished 7th chord, or the minor 7 flat 5. So again, this is a diminished triad sandwiched in between a minor 7th. And if you remember from back at the school all those weeks ago, when you notate this one, or when you use a lead sheet symbol, I should say, to write it, it's a C with a circle, and then you got to put a line through it, then a 7. C, half diminished 7th. That is your, let me erase this just so as not to confuse you, that is your half diminished 7th triad, or sorry, half diminished 7th chord. I keep misspeaking about these. It's been so long since I've taught a theory lesson. Moving right along now, oops, I have some more information on this page. Haha. Often called a minor 7 flat 5, right? The name says it all. It's just a minor 7th chord at the end of the day, but with a lowered 5th. And our final triad, yikes, over here, if you remember what this is, it's almost like there's 2 flats next to this note. Well, that's because there are 2 flats. This is a double flat right here. It means you're lowering the note, not just one time, but 2 times. So compared to the previous slide, you've got the same triad here. It's a diminished triad. And we're just going to pull that down right over here. Same thing again. But instead of having a minor 7th over here, you have something that is double lowered. Whenever you have a minor interval and then you lower it a second time, you're going to end up calling that a diminished interval. So in the case of this one, it is a dim seventh. Diminished seventh as in the interval, not as in the chord. It can be a little bit weird, as you know, talking about music using theory language, because sometimes different words can be used to describe the same thing, or same words can be used to describe different things. So in this case, same words being used to describe different things. Diminished seventh interval. This is going to sound, if you remember, it's going to sound the same as a major sixth. Now, why is that? Because if you take a B and you lower it twice, to your ears, it's going to sound like an A, which is a really weird thing that happens with music. It's one of those things, like a spelling situation, that just creates confusion sometimes. But diminished seventh, because at the end of the day, when I count up to this B, it's still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's still a seventh. So I can't call it a major sixth. I have to call it a diminished seventh. And conveniently enough, that's also going to be the name of this chord, a diminished seventh chord. Just talking about how that's defined, how that's fully identified. It is a diminished triad sandwiched between a diminished seventh. And again, right here, the diminished seventh sounds like a major sixth. And if you're having trouble keeping up with my narration over this, not to worry. Like I said, I'm going to put up a printout, or not a printout, but a PDF of this PowerPoint presentation, so you can have all of this information out there for you to look at without my voice over the top and without my pacing getting in the way of you learning as much as you can. So diminished seventh, a diminished triad sandwiched between a diminished seventh. All of the seventh chords, I had you write these down. You should still have them all written down. I'm just going to click through really quick. I think it's really nice to note the differences in the triads here. So between the major and the dominant seventh, it's always, in both cases, going to be a major triad on the bottom. Between half diminished and diminished, it's always going to be a diminished triad on the bottom. The only time you'll ever see a minor triad on the bottom is in your minor seventh chord. So if you just think of that, you can already, just from looking at a triad, or looking at a seventh chord, as long as you can narrow down and identify that your triad is either major, diminished, or minor, then you're going to have a real easy time narrowing down your answers. Because as you can see here, if you know it's a major triad, there's only two options. If you know that it's a diminished triad, there's only two options. If you know that it's a minor triad, there's only one possibility that it could be. So make sure you've got all this stuff written down, and if you haven't already, practice using either this homework assignment, which you should have done. I will not be collecting this homework assignment, by the way. This is kind of a freebie for you because everything started to go south after I assigned this one. So hang on to that, and if you did it, great. If you didn't, use that for practice, or log on to that musictheory.net and practice identifying some there. I'll also be putting out on later this week a little worksheet that I need all of you to complete. It'll be our first assignment in this class, and that's just going to be y'all's identifying different seventh chords using sight. And next time I put up a video, maybe we'll talk a little bit more about how to identify using your ears. Again, though, that is something that you can just practice using musictheory.net. If you remember back when I sent out all that information at the beginning of this closure, I had a pretty detailed instructional sheet about how to set up your musictheory.net to practice identifying these intervals by ear. So more importantly than anything else, though, as we move forward with this, just be sure that you're not overwhelming yourself with the musical side of things. Keep in mind that the whole reason that I'm teaching you about music is because, one, I love it, it's amazing, and two, because I think it can be such a beautiful thing to take your mind away from all of the stresses of life. And as I'm sure you're aware, I'm sure you're feeling, there's a lot of stress going on right now. And I really don't want music to be added to that. So if you're ever feeling overwhelmed by the music side of this, let me know. Take a minute of pause, just relax, listen to some of your favorite music, listen to some of the reasons why you're in this class, and just take a moment of pause to collect yourself and get yourself back on track. Like I said, I do not want, this is the last class that I want to be a burden on your mental and educational load right now. But if you're feeling up for it, the sky's really the limit with how much you can be practicing this stuff. So to wrap things up, be on the lookout for that assignment coming out in the next few days on your 7th chords. And if you have any questions or concerns, you can contact me through the Google Classroom, send an email if you'd like to set up a little bit of a tutoring session for 15 minutes through Zoom. We can also do that using the Google form that is on the Classroom page. Until next time, have a great rest of the week, enjoy the rest of the day, and be sure that you're doing something that you love every single day.